According to an algorithm, the corona pandemic could drive 1 million people in the Sahel region from their homes. Such predictions help humanitarian organizations identify trends and act more quickly. What would cost even an expert hour? Foresight, that's the name of the algorithm, delivers in seconds. The forecasting software of the Danish Refugee Council evaluates information from more than 120 data sources, analyzes patterns, and then calculates, for example, how the corona crisis can affect displacement of people. Accordingly, as a result of the pandemic in the countries of Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and Nigeria, a total of around 1 million people could be forced to leave their homes. The misery in the conflict-ridden region is therefore forecast to worsen again. Software such as Foresight should make decision-making processes in humanitarian aid and corresponding operations more efficient in the future. The tool helps us to predict what will happen more quickly so that we can plan better and intervene earlier in humanitarian crisis, says Charlotte Siente, Secretary General of the DRC. Fast reactions are also often cheaper. Experts from the refugees aid organizations have already tried in the past to make predictions about flight and displacement based on data and empirical values. The algorithm should now help to predict even more precisely when a scenario will occur and to better analyze the effects of various factors such as the economic situation, conflict, climate, or governance. Siente calls this DNA of displacement. However, the algorithm is not a silver bullet. The software doesn't know what will happen tomorrow or next week, says Siente. The forecasts refer to the next 1 to 3 years, and the model cannot say anything about whether people will flee within the country or whether they will decide to cross national borders. The Danish Refugee Council wants to make its forecasting software available to other organizations via a platform in the future. There is great interest in such tools in the humanitarian field, but the use of data analysis and forecasting software is still in the experimental phase. The data expert Miguel Luengo-Dros attributes the fact that it took longer for the trend to establish itself in crisis management and development aid due to a lack of technical knowledge, but also to limited capacities in humanitarian organizations. Development experts and data experts usually do not speak the same language. They do not have a common vocabulary, come from different contexts, and often cannot coordinate their goals, wrote Luengo-Dros, Chief Data Scientist of UN Global Pulse, in an essay. UN Global Pulse is one of the United Nations initiatives, which is why it is doing pioneering work at the interface between development aid and technology. Among other things, it researches the potential of big data and artificial intelligence and supports other UN agencies in implementing projects. During the pandemic, governments around the world are particularly interested in data-based models that can estimate the spread of COVID-19 infections and the effect of planned strategies and possible side effects. The innovation team of the UN Refugee Agency UNHCR has already developed various experimental approaches to collect information on future migration movements. For example, data analysts used open source data to determine future weather conditions for boat trips across the Mediterranean and observed Facebook posts by smugglers in order to obtain information on price developments, frequently used routes, and the crowds at nodes. They also used algorithms to analyze social networks such as Twitter for keywords and negative expressions of emotions in order to record the moods of narratives of migrants. Sometimes rather unusual looking data such as rising prices for water cans and failing goat prices point to an impending movement, as in Somalia. When people started getting rid of 50 or 60 goats at a time, prices were depressed and we had an indication that people are planning to flee, said Andrew Harper of the UN Refugee Agency UNHCR. The backgrounds for flight and displacements are diverse, which also makes the development of forecasting software a challenge. It is a complex interplay of many different factors, and you cannot explain the phenomenon by focusing on just one aspect, says Alexander Kjerum, the technical expert at the Danish Refugee Council who co-developed the Foresight software. He was surprised by the extent to which, in addition to conflicts, governance and human rights violations have an impact on displacement. When the pilot project started 2.5 years ago, it was unclear whether the software would be able to achieve meaningful results. The development was a constant process of trial and error. Today, Kjerum is confident. We are still in the development phase and are constantly working to refine and improve the software, but the results so far are encouraging and show a high level of accuracy, he says. To test Foresight, the team fed the software with data on Myanmar and Afghanistan and had it simulate scenarios for periods from the past. The forecasts were then compared with reality. According to Kjerum, the algorithm made very precise predictions with an error rate of 8 to 10%. The self-learning algorithm analyzes historical data from the past 20 to 25 years for its predictions in order to identify patterns and to draw conclusions for the future from them. The more complete statistics from the past are available, the more precise the forecasts. The software primarily accesses national data from organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank and governments on conflicts and human rights violations, economic development or socio-economic factors. The disadvantage of this approach, since the software focuses on national rather than local data, causes such as locally limited conflicts can be more difficult to evaluate because the data density is lower. 15 key indicators are particularly relevant for the algorithm to calculate the risk of forced displacement, including unemployment, corruption, public services, food security, political murders, civilian victims in conflicts, human rights violations, natural disasters, and social inequality. The software not only calculates the number of displaced persons, users can also explore the relationship between the various indicators in a causality model. The algorithm can also simulate various scenarios. If experts want to estimate the effects of the corona crisis, for example, they can simulate what would happen if the economy in a country collapsed by a few percentage points, the ability to govern falls, or the intensity of the conflict increases. The software then creates new risk forecasts for forced evictions. But it's difficult for the software to predict very sudden or unprecedented events such as the Rohingya conflict in 2017 and the mass displacements, said Kjerum. Myanmar soldiers murdered thousands of people, destroyed villages and raped women and children of the Muslim minority in a brutal military offensive. More than 700,000 people had to flee. Further country simulations are to be made available in the coming months. In the future, the code should also be available online for other users so that organizations can adapt it to their needs and further data. Charlotte Slente, Secretary General of the Danish Refugee Council, is also aware of the software's limit. Forecasts are not a precise science and should not be the only basis for decision making, she says. The experiences and assessments of crisis workers and development experts will not be replaced by an algorithm in the future either. And right here you now see a button where you can subscribe to my channel, and I would really appreciate if you do so. And right here there is another video from YouTube if you are interested in more European or global politics. I'll see you in my next video. Click and enjoy. Viel Spaß!